everybody. Welcome to Hysterical. I'm Jenna Busch, here with my co-host, Anastasia Washington.
Hello, everyone.
So our podcast is a comedy history podcast. And today, obviously, we are talking about the life of Jane Austen. Now, we know a lot of you guys probably know a lot of this information. So it is not strictly a here's what happened kind of a podcast today. Today, we're actually going to be talking about Jane, about why she was writing and about some of her themes, whether she was a feminist, things like that. So I was first introduced to Jane Austen in high school. I did my term paper on Pride and Prejudice.
Did you know?
I did. It's probably in my parents' house somewhere still all these years later, but that was...
Fair enough.
Yeah. And what about you?
I mean, I think I was probably introduced to movies before the books, probably like in middle school, like watching some of the movies, and then got like obsessed and read a lot of Jane Austen. The same way I kind of like Edgar Allan Poe, gateway drugged, which is like Vincent Price movies. Then I like was like, well, I got to know everything. So I really think it was like probably my mom introducing me to one of the older like Jane Austen iterations of like Pride and Prejudice or something like that, like something like that. And then going, okay, well, let me read these. And so, yeah, like around middle school or high school, picking up the books, and then, yeah, just being engulfed in the world,
It's fascinating. Someone actually asked me recently, because I guess recently before the pandemic,
before the pandemic.
Yeah. In the before times, asked me about, because I write a lot of feminist stuff. And one of the things I was asked was about why I was so interested in rewatching the movies and rereading the books, that were very focused on marriage and a specific time when women were not as free as they are now. And I really did sit down and think about it, because it is something that I'll watch over and over again. And I think it's because what I'm watching is someone sort of navigating rules that exist, whether they're right or not. They're still rules that exist, and finding creative ways to navigate them. You look at somebody like Jane Austen, who, though she was close once, never married, but sat outside as an observer and wrote about the rules that existed in her society and ways to get around them. And I just think that's really interesting. I sort of think about it. I know this is a very strange comparison to draw, but I think about it as a girl playing video games. When I started writing as an entertainment reporter, I really didn't run into a lot of other women. I knew plenty of women who played video games, but they just weren't, talked about. So, you were this unicorn, and you were this girl who hung out with guys and things like that. And that was sort of how we navigated things back then. Doesn't mean it was, the rules were okay. It doesn't mean that it was the best decision to make, but that's what we had. So we worked around it.
Well, I also think like, okay, obviously we're a history-based podcast, so we look back at things. Yeah. We observe, we, process how it used to be. We're interested in that, because to move on and to move forward, you have to know where you came from. And in the day, these people were progressive, maybe not as progressive as we think they should be, whatever. Like, that's a judgment that you can only make really if you're living that kind of situation, right? Yeah. You don't even have these options that we have now. So, I mean, that's a huge judgment to be like, there's some like clean cut things that you're like, okay, that person was not a feminist. That person was racist. That person was. I think a woman living within her circumstances of the time and kind of tiptoeing and pushing the lines seems pretty feminist to me during those times. I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I can't make a judgment about how I would be if my whole purpose in life and all the pressure of my family was for me to get married. And that was all my friends pressures were and all my family members' pressure was, and all, like, that's a whole different pill to swallow that I haven't had to. So I'm lucky. So I can't really judge if that was what you had to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because the thing is, it's interesting because, we think about, Jane was born in the late 1700s. And though her family was gentry, they didn't really have any money or not much. And so it was sort of interesting to look at that sort of situation, which existed a lot, where there were things expected of you. There was behavior that was expected of you. If you had less standing in society as a woman, you might have to work. You might have to go out and, work in the fields, or you might have to work in a dress shop, or you might have to work in any kind of store, or whatever you had to do. Raising children, also work. You'd have to do it yourself. But gentry, it was not expected. So there wasn't a whole lot of room for a choice.
Right.
There's a really interesting.
If she chose to do a job and you were in that level of society, I mean, it was kind of like, why are you doing that? Like, like kind of an insult to your family, or like bringing down your family name too.
Yeah. And
so
that was
like,
a really big deal. And she was very close to her family. So, she's got her parents and her 6 brothers and her 1 sister, who was also her closest friend.
Big family.
Huge family. But it's interesting. This is obviously not Jane Austen, but there's a monologue in the newest version, the Greta Gerwig version of Little Women, where you have a character talking about marriage is a financial deal. And maybe not for a man, but for a woman it is. Because her money, as she says, is not hers. It's her father's. When she gets married, her money is her husband's. If she has children and she leaves the marriage, she doesn't get to keep them. She doesn't, like, if she doesn't marry, she doesn't have money. She can't work to get money. She has to do this to help her family. So you're sort of backed into this thing. And then you have a lot of, men writing at the time saying, well, oh, marriage is all that women think about. What else did you give them? Like,
right. That's the thing. It's like you complain about this, like the systematic, like, thing that you put us in, the structure that you put us in, and then you're like, but that's all they. Well, dude, like,
yeah, it's sort of like if you think about
if I was doing something else, you would be complaining about that. There's no pleasing you. That's what it is.
It's sort of like if you think about the sort of sexual mores now that, like, well, say 20 years ago. If you had sex too early as a woman, you were a slut. If you didn't, you were a prude. If you dress a certain way, you're a whore. If you don't, you're
the Madonna whore complex.
Yeah, like and then they're like, why do women care so much about the way they look? Well, let's see. Why would that be? So, so the obsession with marriage, like, I just think it's really interesting because, to me, reading this, I'm watching her heroines for the most part. Or the very least in Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, sort of navigate this idea of being a very different sort of woman, or either practical or emotional, or someone who is smarter than most of the men that she's dealing with. Right. Someone who focuses on her family, because that was something that was important to Jane. And then has to figure out a way to follow these rules and still remain true to herself. And I think that's fascinating. Or, you've got Emma, who is looking at the way things are supposed to be and realizing that that's not maybe the best way things could be. And that, she's trying to help her friend. She's trying to help somebody get into a marriage that is good for them, but doesn't realize that, like, stature and being a good person are not the same. So it's commenting very much on what was going on. And also, these were published anonymously.
Right.
So, Lady A. So you don't, she's not doing this. You can take some of the ego out of it. And she wasn't famous during her lifetime. They even talk about during her funeral that the funeral procession, her sister wrote about it and just said, like, as it was just, her brothers mourning her, and then as the thing turned the corner, that's it. Her best friends out of her life. And she didn't really, in the end, make that much money. She made about £650, which was a lot of money then, but not, considering she had 4 novels published during her lifetime.
Not considering this legacy, and I think that's the thing. But that is the case in so many of these stories of authors of the past. The amount of I don't know, impact that they made on the world, and the amount of money-making machine that they are now, because Jane Austen, they don't stop with the Jane Austen content, nor should they, but we have so many, and can you imagine, for all of that she got £600?
I know, right? Like, just think about all the versions of the movies, and they keep being made. There's a new one all the time, and I'm fine with that.
TV shows, miniseries, spin-offs,
zombie versions. And I think it's so interesting because she's got these short novels. She attempted this with Lady Susan. She's got this epistolary novel, Lady Susan, where she's got a very different kind of heroine. Even the stuff that she did as a kid, her juvenile work, the volume number 1, 2, and 3, and she's got these women who are very different than the heroines you saw written by men. And it is very interesting because, we don't have nearly as many female authors that were published.
Right.
I want to make sure that's clear, that were published. And when you see them, and, we've talked about Mary Shelley and a bunch of, other people, but it's really interesting to see the different things they have to go through to publish by themselves, and how that sort of informs what they continue to write. Because, you look at somebody who hasn't, who goes through the regular upper class British life as a woman. So you're born, you've got your family, you look for a husband, you get married, you have all the children, and then you die. Okay.
And then you look for a mate for your kids, and then you die.
Yes. You make sure your children are married off, and then you die. If you're lucky, if you don't die in childbirth. So, there's only so much that average life-wise, I can speak. So much that it can expand your world. But if you're a woman and you're taking your manuscript out to get it published in a time where that was very unusual, you're trying to negotiate your own rates. You've got whether or not, like Jane's had to do, whether or not you give away the copyright or you don't give away the copyright. You've got something like Pride and Prejudice that was really super successful, and then the novels that came after were less successful. That's something, just having to go through that experience is going to change you. It's going to change how you write women in the future. And it is interesting in this time period, just looking at like the whole discussion about where she does Sense and Sensibility, where you're talking about somebody who's being very logical and practical versus somebody who's being very emotional. And
which in itself is kind of groundbreaking, because I feel like a male of that time would have leaned into more of a hysterical, emotional female lead. And to have somebody that had a mind of their own, I mean, not that we don't have examples of this, but it's very much vilified in history. Like, we have like a Taming of the Shrew type character, right? Where she is very outspoken to the point where she's like wretched, and like, because it was interesting because, Jane was always sort of considered to be odd, boisterous, fun, loving, but odd. And that was, you didn't necessarily always want. This is something I watched a really interesting thing where the historian Lucy Worsley did a little piece on Jane Austen and was talking about a funny woman. And it is interesting that you didn't want your wife to be super witty, because if she's wittier than you, that's not going to reflect well on you. And it's funny because I don't know that that's really a consideration now. I hope to be funny. That is my goal. You do stand up. So I mean, I will say, as a witty woman, it is
you are
interesting. Thank you. I try to be witty. As a witty woman, which you can say which woman over and over again, and it sounds funnier and funnier. I will say it is still a difficult thing for a female to be.
Yeah.
Not to the extent, obviously, back then we don't, like, my whole worth isn't like, if I'm too witty, I won't ever get a man. And then if I don't ever get a man, I will die on the street. Like that's
because
maybe not true anymore.
No.
It's possibly not true. Maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's some stuff in these that are still like just timeless, like tropes or timeless situations that, are just still kind of breathe true. Maybe not to the extent, or to the pressure of that, but of just being an outspoken woman, of being someone that's smart, of being someone that's not afraid to give a comeback or give
or a dissenting opinion.
Right. Yeah.
I got a lot of that.
Show your intelligence, to not cower away from your intelligence, but to show it. And I think that's one of the things that's very everlasting about these books, is that a lot of female readers, I will say, especially like me when I was younger, was like, oh, you can talk, you can like not dumb yourself down, you can do this stuff and still end up with somebody and love, it's a very romantic ideal. It's the Disney princess in us all that's like, oh, can we be ourselves? Can we unleash these different parts of ourselves and still, and it's sad. Like I'm not gonna lie, but it's sad. But like some of these books really give us like that. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing that I notice is a lot of times it celebrates female friendships, whether it's with your sister or just a friend. But that's something that I don't hear talked about quite as much with these books, is that it's really lovely. And we talk all the time, we all, with our friends, we text and we email and we Zoom and we do all of this stuff, but these were letter writing people. These where you really had to.
I kind of miss. I like letters. I like getting mail. I do.
Send us mail, you guys. Send us mail.
Little letters. And, they don't have to be little letters, because like that would be ridiculous if you have to always just like have tiny little letters to send us. But it'll also be cute. So I don't know.
And it's interesting too, because you see, in some of the work, fathers that are very supportive, which is something that was not necessary of women who were smart. It's not something you always see, and it's also interesting here to see like that her actual father did sort of support her and her sister, would buy them expensive paper, they didn't have a lot of money, and that there was sort of this open idea of discussion in the house. And he was running a boys' school, so she was exposed to a lot of people as a child too, and they would put on plays, and I don't know, I think and having free access to her dad's library. And I just think it's so interesting, because in this time period you don't see a lot of that. And I just think about like there's one of the versions, I've seen so many versions of Pride and Prejudice. There's so many, but the one with Keira Knightley and her father, and just that it's actually very sweet, or even just looking sort of humanely at women. Like there's often a character who just doesn't stop talking, and I'm just thinking of that version again, where you've got Lizzie's mom, and she's just like, marriage. I have to get my daughters married. And then she's like, yes, you talk to me when you have 5 daughters, and we can see what else is on your mind.
Right.
And it is very interesting, because it is, though she's a sort of funny character who's very marriage obsessed, when you see that, when you think about that, you're like, oh yeah, what else is like, this is important. This is a big deal.
She's trying to, in her mind, she's panicking, and she's got an anxiety about what is going to happen if I were to like drop dead right now to my daughters. Like, what would I like? And like, if there was a horrible accident, both the parents died, what would be, like, how would these women like be taken care of in this world. And that's a sad thing that you have to say that, but
it's true if you think about Sense and Sensibility. I mean, that's what happens. They don't have any. And then, you know, too, with Jane herself, I mean, when they had to move to Bath, which she hated, which is so, I understand, because I understand, like, it was the society thing, and it was the fact that it was all tourists and all that. I just love Bath, though. It's so cool.
It is cool. I mean, but again, like we're coming from like an American
totally
mindset.
Different, yeah.
We're like, that sounds amazing, and then we're like,
there, you guys, like, yeah. But it is, you know, it's interesting. And then, you know, how often people were sent away. You know, she was at a boarding school, and her mom would have the kids, keep them there for a couple months, send them away to a nurse. I mean, not that far away, but, you know, they could still see them, but, you know, for 12 to 18 months, or it's such a different lifestyle. But it is really interesting because that did happen to her. You know, her father died, possibly got malaria, we don't know, but from where they were living. And, you know, she'd been almost married. She'd met this guy named Tom Lefroy, and they flirted, and they were going to get married. And then the next day she's like, no. And, you know, just even looking at like her thoughts on that, like what was it? Was it the fact that if she got married, then she'd be expected to have children, and then she wouldn't have time to write? And was it himself? Like, she liked him. She jokes about his coat, very bad coat. She's like, I shall refuse him, however, unless he promises to give away his white coat, because, like, I'm sorry if he's going to wear that.
I mean, we all have our deal breakers.
We do.
I haven't seen the white coat, so I cannot comment, but I
trust her.
I respect that.
Yeah.
And it's called a boundary. No,
I know, right? Like,
I mean, like, I don't know, like, that's so much. I mean, it's pressure now. It's pressure, like, to get into a marriage. Back then, it's like a woman getting married with, like, I don't want to say ownership, but yeah, like that, like, and she had all these, in that time at least, freedoms that a lot of, you know, women didn't. So, like, can you imagine, like, going, okay, well, like, he's saying that now, but, like, you know, like, I don't know what he even said to her. Like, I don't know if he was like, you know, you can still be you, whatever. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's an expectation of, like, okay, but we do get married and you change your mind. I have no.
Yeah, there's nothing I can do about it.
There's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, like, because I'm no longer protected. And the thing is, you know, he had a lot of money, and it could have changed her family circumstances. But, and I don't know, you know, if it was that was absolutely the reason, but it certainly makes sense. You know, she's commenting on a lot of this stuff on marriage and the idea of marriage, you know, from someone who's not married. But sometimes those are the best people to look at an institution, to say, like, well, I'm watching it from the outside, because when you're in it, you know, you have a very different viewpoint. And I do think it's really interesting to just look at her views of marriage and what makes a good person, and, you know, human nature versus following the rules with, you know, Sense and Sensibility. Yeah. And it is really interesting. It's also very interesting to see what adaptations do to them, you know, like, or just even the Pride and Prejudice, where you have a different ending for American audiences versus British audiences.
You know, us Americans can't take anything.
I mean, we can't. To be perfectly honest, like, we can't. But
we couldn't even, you know, deal with Ducky ending up with her and Pretty in Pink.
No, love Ducky.
We're wrong. Americans are wrong. I'm just
very
kidding.
often.
No, we're great. We're great, but we're also horrible.
Yeah.
Just like most people.
That's a great way to put it. We're great, but we're also horrible.
Like, it's interesting. I know they make the Jane Austen films over and over again, and the miniseries over and over again, and they make TV shows and stuff like that. I do think it is interesting what they keep, what they add, what elements they really spotlight and stuff like that. I do think it's a reflection of probably the time period they're made in too, you know, like if we look at the 90s version or the 80s version, and we look at the ones that, you know, just came out recently, you know, like,
very different. And unless you know the source material, like, I think these have major impact on people depending on which version you see, you know, and And it's just, I don't know, part of the reason I love them is because it's a different lifestyle. There's a lot of walking. Everyone walks everywhere. Everyone gets sick from walking in the rain because, reasons. The visits where you go in the morning and you leave your card and then someone calls you back. And like, it's interesting because just in this particular thing that Lucy Worsley did, they were showing all the different places and all the rooms they rented. Like in Bath, they found this place at Four Sydney Place, and she and her mom had looked at all these other places and they weren't good enough. And this place was £150 a year, and you can still go there, by the way, which is super cool. And now I want to. But they could rent it for 3 years. And then when they had to leave there, they had to go back to places they didn't like. And it's, and that seems like a silly small thing, but it wasn't. Like, there were no distractions. There's no TV. There's no cars. There's, you're just, every decision you make is a big deal, and it takes a long time to decide. And, so in this thing, they're showing this place, and they were talking about, the different things you had to wear during the day, different things you had to do to visit people, how long you would stay if someone didn't want you there, or if it was just a casual visit, it'd be 15 minutes to a half an hour. And
which I kind of love. Can we implement some of this stuff now? Like, I'm sorry that this is your 15 minutes.
Yes, it's
I want to shift my purse like the queen to say, like,
I know. Like, now it's time to leave.
Leave.
Yes, please wrap this up. And, or like the post-dinner, you go upstairs for tea. And then the second level of guests, like the Austens probably went to those things, and people might be reading or playing music, and some of them were boring. And she wrote about this. And it's sad because, I know her sister gets vilified a lot, even though she was like her bestest bud. She burned a lot of her letters, which at the time was probably a good thing for her and her family, but maybe not, not for us. No. But it I guess in a way it adds to this sort of mystery. She's just such an interesting woman because she was probably described as very pretty, but not beautiful. She was gentry, but she didn't have money. She had her own profession. She was sort of, her brothers helped her out in different ways. She had all these ideas. She wanted to run her own business. Like, she tried to go in and negotiate for herself. And it's interesting. She wrote, there's this line, single women have a dreadful propensity for being poor, which is one very strong argument in favor of matrimony, which I think is very funny. But at the same time, she didn't go along with that. Like, she just went out and did her own work. And, it's just watching where she went, watching where she moved, and the walks that she took, and the acid comments she made about people, and the fact that when she ended up living with her mom, her sister, her friend Martha, and some servants, they're all these women smashed into this little place. And she wasn't very good at housework, apparently, because she'd get up in the morning before anyone else got up and play piano for 2-3 hours, which is a delightful way to be awoken, I think.
Well, I think so. Well, depending on the song.
And how early, I guess. Yeah,
I will say that might be interesting. Here's a weird fact that I kind of came up with in my research was, like, you were talking about the walks that they always took. So there's a book called The Jane Austen Diet that you can find, and a guy wrote it based on, like, the habits of Jane Austen's, the time period of Jane Austen's books, but also in the books, kind of like what they ate and how they walked and how they did this. And it's basically when you analyze it, it's basically a keto diet and like multiple like a lot of different walks. So you just like space out your food and you walk like all the time. And
so much walking.
So interesting because like when you think about it, they like, I think in the book, I mean, obviously I didn't read the whole book. I just, but like you start with a slice of very thinly toast in the morning, like a sourdough, like a thin slice of toast. And for the rest of the day, you're basically eating meat and cheese. Meat and cheese, meat and cheese, meat and cheese, meat and cheese, meat and cheese.
Oh. I'm sorry, I'm going to be rude for a second. How did anyone poop?
Well,
the walking.
Maybe they didn't. Or maybe just the corsets just, I don't know. That's not how corsets work.
Yeah, but it's funny because they used to actually on boats a lot. And weirdly, the first time I heard this was from James Michener's Hawaii, which is a very problematic book. But no one could poop, so they'd walk around the deck. They just keep walking around the deck and walking around the deck of the ship because, you gotta get stuff moving. Get stuff moving.
Oh.
But it's also
maybe that's why they take so many walks.
So many walks. I mean,
maybe
if you're not eating vegetables, it's a problem. But also, I think there are even moments where you're in a room visiting with people, and someone will say, "Take a turn around the room with me," so you can speak privately as you walk in a circle around all the people who are also in the room. And it's just fascinating. The manners, I think, are one of the things that are both fascinating and fun, but also horrifying. That certain things.
That's a good description.
Yeah, or just even the scene, and I'm going to go back to and this one's the Emma Thompson Sense and Sensibility, where they're all doing stuff, they're kind of lazing around, all the ladies, and then men are coming to visit, so they're like, throw all the ribbons in the things, and now pinch your cheeks and look like you've been relaxing leisurely. They know where you live. They know you're not relaxing in a leisurely fashion. But they know what you're doing.
It's the presentation, Jenna. Yeah. It's the presentation.
We just have to suggest that, if someone came over my house right now, would probably clean up and suggest that I always live in a pristine apartment, except that it's not true, and we all know it's not true. But we'll have this polite fiction that it is.
I like the polite fiction, but I think I'm the worst at that. I'm always the opposite. I think I have a little Jane Austen in me with a I don't love housework.
Me either.
But I don't think anybody really loves the housework aspect. But my mother's always like, "Oh, we're gonna have company over. We should clean the house." And I'm like, "No, after they leave, we should clean because I want it clean for me."
Yes. Also, your house is always clean when I'm over there.
Thank you. That's an illusion, but thank you.
I do not judge the past year because I haven't seen you in a year other than this, but
Yeah, but it's just I'm not gonna I'm always especially before parties and stuff like that. I'm like, no, they're gonna
mess it up anyway.
Let's clean after.
Yes. Yes.
Apparently, though, the Austen family was I think everybody has their I guess their dish that they were known for at the gentry level, right?
Yeah.
So theirs was pea soup.
Oh, I love pea soup.
And I guess
that has fiber. You could have that.
Their pea soup and a spare rib and pudding were their common impressive meal when an unexpected guest came over. Pea soup was especially
I could be the guest. I would eat the pea soup.
Well, see, I would not.
Wait, but does it have pork in it? Can't have that, and neither can you.
I don't know. There is a recipe here, but I think this is just somebody
just a pea soup.
Yeah, a pea soup. So I won't. But if it is, this one has anchovies in it. So
I can't have that.
I can't have that because that sounds nasty.
Yeah.
Not because of anything dietary, just that's gross. It's when I went to Portugal and they were putting canned cod and sardines and everything, and I was like, I'm allergic to.
The first thing I learned in every language or for every country I visit is I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat fish. The important things.
And if you were living in Jane Austen's time, you would just probably starve.
I probably would. I would be miserable all the time because I can't have anything that they have.
They had some hearty food. It seems like it wasn't, we've discussed on this show, what Catherine the Great ate or what, Marie Antoinette ate, and they kind of were a lighter than the stuff we're reading, at least in these in the references I've seen. It seems heartier.
Yeah, and then you've got dinners that are several hours long, and I don't know how they do that. Then they got to go walk because they got to walk off all the food and the wine, which apparently she loved. She did enjoy the wine. She mentioned it in a number of letters about. And there was one that she mentioned where she was talking about a hangover. So she's relatable, you guys.
Ooh.
She gets hungover.
A hangover. Can you imagine the cures that they try to put on
Oh
when
God.
they have a
Oh,
hangover?
no. In fact, in that video, there was this really interesting thing that they had found. She had a recipe for ink. And you could make it ink with like oak gall. I think it was oak galls. She said galls from the tree and stale beer, which doesn't have any
What is a
chemical.
gall?
Oh, it's like the little ball growths on the side of trees.
Oh.
Yeah. So you take that and you grind it up. And there's all this stuff that you put into it, and then you have to leave it for 2 weeks,
And
but
beer.
shake it a couple times. Well, the beer, Lucy Worsley suggests that the beer was just there for funsies, but because it doesn't have any bearing on the actual recipe. But
so she just drank the beer?
wouldn't you? What else are you doing?
I would. That's
yeah,
true.
you're
Valid
walking,
point.
you're drinking, you're walking again, then you're writing, playing piano, then walking. So yeah, it was a bit. In fact, it was a big thing that like she really loved gardens, and if she had gone to stay with her brother, and then her brother put her in Chawton Cottage toward the end of her life, and she'd do a lot of walks around there. She died very young too. I mean, she died at 41, which is insane because the amount of beautiful work that she had, or she had things that she didn't finish, Sanditon, which she didn't finish, and I so wish her sister hadn't burned her letters, because I'd love to know more about this woman. And I think it's sometimes frustrating just in general with women in this time period, that either you did something outrageous and people wrote stuff about you, or you didn't do anything and maybe your letters didn't survive, or you did something big and then no one wanted your information to get out. So, we're sort of hamstrung. And it is interesting to think, like, we see these little pockets of, Mary Shelley or Madame Lebrun, which we did an episode on about Marie Antoinette's portraitist,
right,
where you have she wrote her memoirs. So that was but then it's just from her point of view. So, we see these pockets of these incredible women, and you wonder how many other women were like this that we didn't know about, or
didn't have the advantages,
yeah,
or that
didn't learn to write.
Hid under another person's name that maybe we haven't uncovered that yet.
Yeah, because I mean, she was published Lady A. Like there's so many, or so many people who published under male names, pen names, and we'll never know were women. Or a certain other episode we did where men tend to take credit for the stuff that their wives
do.
Yep. Yeah. So
that's for another con.
Yes, it is. Yeah, but it comes up a lot in our episodes, so it does. I do find that really interesting. But I think I would be really interested, listeners, if you guys want to let us know, your favorite book of hers, your favorite work of hers, even if it was something from her juvenilia, and your thoughts on whether or not she was a feminist, because it's an interesting discussion, because it really does depend on your version of feminist. Like, you can look back at somebody in the 70s and say, well, that was feminism, but it was a different type of feminism. It wasn't intersectional. It wasn't, or look back at earlier feminists, or the suffragette movement, where it was just being suffragettes for white women, and we'll get to you later. And, so, definitions of words are always changing. But I think one thing we can say is that for her time, she was unusual and progressive.
Agreed. I think, just like any movement, there's an adjustment and change in time. So, I mean, in my opinion, she made a mark. She made a very big mark on society. So.
Yeah. And I'll be interested to see, people's opinions on adaptations too. So if you guys want to tell us your favorite adaptations, because I know, sometimes things are changed. Just even having like a Sense and Sensibility written by Emma Thompson, directed by Ang Lee, like, so interesting. And just, what he was saying about, though his background very different, he also did live with that sort of imperialism, that feeling of it. So, and I think that's my favorite adaptation of anything. That it might also be because Emma Thompson is just wonderful, and I love her.
Like, let us know your favorites, and also, you know, I'm just going to stir the pot a little bit. Let us know the ones that you hate. I want to know.
Yeah.
No,
I'd love to know that, actually. I'm very interested because, you know, there are bits of things like, you know, people have had issues with a certain character played by Jenna Malone. You know?
Yeah, I would, you know, I want to hate watch some stuff too.
Yeah, I'll hate watch anything. You just send us all your stuff. And now we will tell you where you can do that.
Yes.
We would love it if you would follow the Hysterical Podcast. We are Hysterical, Histerical pod on all social media. You can subscribe and leave us a rating. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. And you can find me at Jenna Busch, Busch, like the beer, not the president, on all the platforms. And yeah, it's important that I spell that out, since you guys are probably newer to our podcast. And where can we find you?
You can find me at Anastasia W on Twitter and TikTok, at Anastasia Wash on Instagram, and Anastasia TV on YouTube.
Woo! And thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of the con, and hopefully it will be in person soon.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Bye.